Alright guys, welcome to lecture 9 in the series. So this one's entitled, Do I Ever Really Own Anything? Okay, so this lecture is the natural next step from the legal persons versus natural persons lecture, lecture number 2, and also the previous lecture on jurisdiction. So in lecture 2, we talked about who can hold stuff, who can own stuff in law. And we talked about natural persons and legal persons as the concepts that can own things, right? And we said companies, trusts, foundations, these are your legal tools, okay? So in this lecture, we're going to go one layer deeper. So please go and watch at least the previous lecture on jurisdiction and lecture 2 about natural persons and legal persons. It will really help frame this lecture and you'll understand it better because we're going to go one layer deeper here. Because even when you've got the right legal tool, people will still talk about assets and ownership in an incorrect way, and it can cause expensive mistakes. So we want to avoid those, obviously. So in this lecture, we're going to dive into what it means to actually own something. All right, whether it's a natural person or a legal person, what does it mean to own something? All right, and what role does jurisdiction play as the enforcer? It's the jurisdiction, right? The dominant violence, the government, whatever you want to call it, that allows you to own anything in reality. So it's going to get a little philosophical, right? But don't worry, we'll keep it anchored in the practical realities of the law so we can help benefit your business, okay? That's our job here. Okay, but you do have to understand these somewhat philosophical principles, guys, because you're working hard, you're doing transactions, you're growing your businesses, you're growing your wealth, you're accumulating more property and more assets. But if you don't understand at the core what these things are and what you're actually doing, then you won't be able to keep them and you won't be able to benefit from them. Okay, so anchoring this lecture fundamentally is one basic core idea, right? And that is property is not, can't spell today. Property is not things. You need to stop thinking about property as things, right? So property is not things. According at law, right? Property, your lawyer, your legal team understand, and the law understands property as claims, right? Or rights. That is property according to the law. Property is not the thing. Property is the claim. Property is rights, okay? So you don't own assets. You own enforceable rights. Let's write that down. They're enforceable rights. That's where jurisdiction comes in as the enforcer. Enforceable rights. Property is not the thing. Property is the claim. So most people think that they own a company, right? Or they own a building, or they own a gold bar, or whatever, any asset, right? And they think they own the physical thing. In some sense, yeah, I guess you could say they do. But according to the law, right, as far as the law is concerned, when they say it's their property or they say it's their asset, right, they don't understand that property is not the thing, right? Property is the claim. Okay, so you have property in a building, or you have property in a house, you have property in a gold bar, or you have property in a company. Okay, property is not the thing itself. Property is the claim. I'm going to keep drilling in this core idea. This is how you need to start thinking about property and assets, right? And for any given property, for any given asset, you can have many competing claims from different natural persons and legal persons. Many competing claims, right? So what your average person understands as an asset or as property is not a physical thing, okay? It's a bundle of enforceable rights, right? And it's the legal system or the government, the dominant violence that agrees to enforce them, okay? So, leading on from that, the brutal practical reality, right? If there is no thing, no system to enforce these rights, then you have no property, right? Let that sink in. If there is no dominant violence, if there is no system to enforce the rights and the claims, then there can't be property, okay? All right, so that's a bit philosophical. Why does this matter practically to entrepreneurs and business people like yourself? Okay, so you'll hear entrepreneurs and business people and they'll say, my company or my IP or my villa, my property, my shares, my crypto, my Lambo, okay? In casual conversation, that is fine, of course, whatever. But when money is real, okay, when there's an external stress event, when the law is really involved, and if there's a dispute or an audit or a divorce or a lawsuit, right? The law doesn't care about imprecise vibey language. It cares about rights and enforcement, okay? So this is why a lot of asset protection content you see online is complete garbage, right? People will talk about assets like you can hide assets from the law, all right? You can't hide assets from the very system that defines what the asset is in the first place, right? Again, that's really important to understand. Foundationally, if you think about it, right? How can you hide assets from the very system that defines what the asset is in the first place? So, in later lectures, we're going to go into how you can legally use things like accounting, legally, right, to hide assets in plain sight, so to say. It's very common, it's not so complicated. So we'll get into that later, stay tuned. That's in semester 2, right? But that's for later, okay? In this lecture, we're going to talk about the basics of property and ownership and what it means to actually own things. So again, to make it painfully simple, property is not a physical object, okay? Property is a bundle of enforceable rights or claims. So these rights are like the right to exclude others from a thing, or the right to use a thing, okay? Or the right to transfer a thing, the right to benefit from a thing, the right to enforce other rights, etc. There are many potential rights, and different assets will have different bundles of rights, okay? So a house will have a certain bundle of rights. Shares will have another bundle of rights. Your bank balance has a certain bundle of rights. IP and patents, they're other bundles of rights, okay? But each bundle of rights is dependent on the system to enforce it, okay? So basically, to drill it home, property is not things. This is how you need to start thinking if you want to interact with your legal team better as you do business. Property is not things. Property is the claim, right? It's the claim on things. It's bundles of enforceable rights. Enforcement is the jurisdiction or the dominant violence, right? And if you do not have any system or dominant violence to do the enforcement, then you do not have property, okay? So we can link this back to our earlier stuff that we go over every time. Ownership, control, and benefit as 3 parts of what people commonly understand as ownership. Ownership, control, benefit, it's in pretty much every lecture, okay? We drill it in all the time. Ownership, we mean title. Control, we mean decisions. And benefit, we mean economic enjoyment. Every asset or property has these 3 elements, which the law lets you unbundle and distribute to different natural persons and legal persons, right? Every asset and property has these 3 elements at law. So it's the property rights that make these 3 things real, okay? So when someone challenges you, right, at law, if there's an external stress event, the law, the legal system is going to ask things like who legally had recognized claims, who had title, who had the legally recognized claims apart from title, who had the authority to act, who actually benefited on the facts and circumstances, right? So the things, the objects will change, but the questions will stay the same, okay? So if we go back to our lecture on jurisdiction, the previous one, all right, let's talk about that. So people will sometimes think that assets are global, especially in an increasingly digital world, but they're not, right? They can never be. Assets are located somewhere at the law, okay? Even purely digital ones, all right? It's the asset location that defines the enforcement, or where the rights and the claims and the bundle of rights are enforced. Right, so we'll get into crypto and digital assets and blockchain tokens in its own lecture at some point in semester 2. It does need its own lecture. People don't realize that it's a revolution in property law. People love this technology, but I guess they're not often quite sure why they love it. I guess they don't realize that more than anything else, yes, it's advanced technology, but it enables a revolution in property law, okay? And that's instinctively why they're drawn to it. And you'll see it in the language, like smart contracts, for example. The language of these systems expresses that principle, okay? But we're digressing, right? This is for a future lecture where we'll cover that stuff. In this one, we're covering the legal basics of property and what it is to own things, okay? And in the basics, it's the where, right? That's the jurisdiction. It's the where that matters, because it's the where that practically is going to decide what courts are involved, what tax authorities are involved, what creditors can do and how, the rules of priority, right? The procedures, okay? And this is why, from our last lecture, it's the interaction between jurisdictions that matters, because your assets can be created in one jurisdiction, and then they can be held in another jurisdiction, and then they can be benefited from somewhere else. They can be enforced somewhere else. You get the idea. It's the interaction between jurisdictions where business people will get wrecked. Okay. So look, a very basic example of this principle, right? Let's think of the statement, I have money in the bank, okay? Very simple statement most people would never think about. I have money in the bank, all right? Let's analyze that legally. What does that mean? Let's say you have $500,000 in the bank, so to say, okay? So what you really have then, legally, in most cases, is a claim against the bank. You have an enforceable right to be paid, right? That means your asset is not cash, okay? It's a legal relationship between you and the bank, all right? And that legal relationship comes with consequences. The bank can freeze you, right? It can freeze you out of your balance. The state can compel the bank to freeze you from your balance. Court can issue orders to the bank for things. There are insolvency rules, right? If the bank is insolvent, you can take a haircut based on certain rules. There's compliance professionals inside the bank that can cause issues. The point being, if you treat your bank balance like a physical pile of cash, you will make bad decisions. They're not the same thing. They are different bundles of enforceable rights. They're different types of claims, all right? So another one, shares in a company, simple. So what do you own when you own shares? What do you really own, okay? So you own a bundle of enforceable rights. Those enforceable rights are usually defined by the company law of the enforcement jurisdiction or the constitution of the company, shareholder agreements, local enforcement rules, etc., right? And when you own shares, these bundle of rights, right? These rights could include voting rights, for example. Maybe you have dividend rights or rights to certain information. You have rights in terms of residual claims after creditors, etc. And you hear people say, oh, I have the deed, or it's registered, right? Registration is not magic. Registration is just evidence of a claim, okay? Right, so getting back to the practical. If, in practice, in a jurisdiction, the enforceable area, if enforcement is slow practically, right? If the courts are unreliable, if the procedures are corrupt, if your paperwork is defective, then your property, right, your assets are much weaker than you think. Okay, it's probably useful to think of property rights generally as a spectrum, okay? So it's not binary, okay? Property rights is a spectrum, and your assets and your rights can lie anywhere between two theoretical extremes, okay? So we're going to go through a basic example using real estate in a specific jurisdiction. There's going to be you at one side, right? You're the title holder, right? You're here, okay? So this is you. You are the title holder, right? You're the one who paid for ownership, right? So you have title. So this one here, that's you. You have title here, okay? That is you on one side of our spectrum there, okay? And then we're going to have on the other side, we're going to have a tenant, okay? With their own bundle of rights and claims, okay? And they're a tenant, and they're going to have benefit and control. This is the tenant here. We'll give a hat on them, a little party hat so you can tell the difference, right? Yeah, smiles. Okay, so we'll put you here. You're the landlord to make it clear, right? And then we're going to have the tenant. Excuse my writing here. Okay, so that's the setup, all right? So you're each going to have your own bundle of rights, okay, to the same physical thing, right? In this case, let's make it property. Let's make it a house. Very simple, okay? So here's a house. You've got a tenant, that's someone else, and you've got a landlord, okay? Got a chimney, okay. Kindergarten house, there you go. All right, so the tenant has their bundle of rights, and you as the landlord have your bundle of rights in relation to the thing, which in this case is the house, all right? So at the end of it, I want you to think about where your bundle of rights as the landlord sits on this spectrum. Is it more your house? So is it more over here when you look at the bundle of enforceable rights? Or do you consider it more the tenant's house, right? Okay, in practice we're talking about. There's no correct answer, obviously. You just need to think about these concepts as a lawyer would, and you also need to start thinking about property not as things but as claims. All right, so there is no correct answer. Just think, as you're listening to the bundles of rights of the landlord and the bundles of rights of the tenants, think to yourself, is this house more the landlord's or is it more the tenant's in practice? What do I consider it more? Do I consider it more over here or more over here when it comes to ownership, okay? So we could use a lot of real estate markets around the world, especially in the EU. To illustrate this point, we could also use New York, California, right? But we're going to use Germany in this case, because Germany has some of the strongest tenant rights, certainly in the EU. So we're going to use that as our enforcement jurisdiction in our example. All right, so the first layer of the bundle of rights is title with the landlord, right? So we'll call this layer right, 1, right? Okay, so layer 1, what's that? Okay, we're going to make that title, okay? So title or ownership, okay? And that's your landlord over here, okay? So when you have title to this house, what bundle of rights is that? what kind of rights come with title? Okay, well, simple. It's a right to sell, right? So the title holder has the right to sell. That's clear. That's true in this enforceable jurisdiction that is Germany in this case. So your landlord, they have title over the house, they have a right to sell, and that is part of their enforceable rights, their bundle of rights. What else do they have the right to do? Okay, they can mortgage, right? That's right. So they can mortgage it. Okay, so mortgage is another right they have. So they can introduce another economic actor, in this case the bank, and then that bank, that economic actor, will have their own bundle of enforceable rights and claims in relation to the house once they're introduced. And the right to introduce them and their bundle of enforceable rights belongs to the title holder, okay? So what else? What's some other rights in the landlord's bundle of rights as the title holder? A will. They can leave it to anyone that they want, okay? So they can put it in their will. They can pass it on after death. That's another right in the landlord's bundle of rights as the title holder, okay? They're the primary rights. I think that illustrates the point clearly, okay? So title doesn't mean that you have day-to-day control, right? There are other rights, okay? There's other bundles of rights. If you introduce the bank, right, then they'll have their own bundle of enforceable rights and claims against the thing, the house, right? And then you've got the tenant, okay? So you can think of the tenant here as having benefit and control, okay? So they live in the house and they benefit from it day to day. So they have benefit and control in our ownership in a lot of practical ways. And in this enforceable jurisdiction, right, they have a very strong possession rights, okay? So that's layer 2 of the bundle here. So we've got layer 2 and you've got possession. All right. Probably heard possession is 9/10 of the law. That's what we're getting into. So possession. This is your benefit and control. This is your tenant, right? So they have possession. So what are some of their bundle of rights that come with possession, okay? Well, they can exclude others, okay? They live in it. Even the landlord, they can exclude. The landlord can't just turn up and come in whenever they want, okay? So they have the right to exclude. That's in their bundle of rights. What else? All right, they have the right to enjoy and to live there, right? They have the right to benefit from it. Okay, that's the B. They have the right to benefit from it. What else do they have? What are some other rights? Well, they'll have a lot of rights, but a lot of them we can broadly classify as strong control, okay? So they have strong control. You can break that up into lots of different rights in their bundle, but for the purposes of this, we'll just call it all strong control, okay? So they have rights like the right to exclude anyone they want, including the landlord who has the title. They have the right to enjoy day to day, take benefit from it, right? And they have the right to strong control, okay? They can invite people over, they can kick people out, they can do it. Their strong control is not unlimited, right? So they can't make large structural changes that a title holder could. But by and large, they have very strong control, especially in the enforceable jurisdiction that is Germany, right? So in this particular jurisdiction, possession is much stronger than title day to day. So the enforceable jurisdiction we've chosen is Germany. This could equally apply probably to parts of California if you're in America, or maybe New York City, right? The point being is that the lease reality in Germany, for the purposes of this example, residential leases are effectively long-term and open-ended, right? So the asset that the landlord owns or has title over, right, is not really, is it really theirs is the point. Where would it fall on the spectrum? And I want you to start thinking of it less about, oh, I own a house, right? Because property is not things. And you should start defining it as, I don't own a house here. I own I own a right of possession, a human right of possession sitting inside a house would be one way to look at it, okay? Why do I say it like that? Well, you can't just kick them out, right? You can't say, I want them gone, or you can't say, I found a better tenant, or I want to sell it vacant, okay? That's not enough. Your enforcement rights exist at some level, but only through very, very narrow grounds and formal processes. So the point being, right, is that in practice, if this tenant does not want to leave ever, okay, they're never ever leaving. That's the reality, okay? Also, if you change title, if you exercise your right to sell, okay, as part of your bundle of rights, and the title changes to a new owner, the change of owner doesn't automatically end the lease, right? The buyer, the new owner, the new title holder will take the property subject to the possession rights of the existing tenant. So the title will move, but possession stays. This tenant is never leaving if they don't want to. Remember, possession is both control and benefit in this example. On top of that, you've got rent increases, right? They're completely constrained in this enforceable market. So even if the market rate rises every year, your ability to raise rent is almost nil. It's very much limited by the enforcement jurisdiction, by the state. So your upside in terms of what the Americans call cap rate or yield, right? Your upside there is completely throttled, even though you say to yourself, I own the house, just because you have title, right? Even in Germany, in this specific case, possibly in other jurisdictions, death doesn't always reset the possession. So if the tenant dies, the tenancy can continue with a spouse or a partner, obviously depending on the specific facts and circumstances, right? So you could even consider this, right, in your bundle of rights as, well, you could almost put it here in some instances, right? So it's at least mitigated by the facts and circumstances. So it's questionable if that is even in your bundle of rights as the title holder, okay? So what I want you to ask yourself in this example is, what do I actually own here, right? Where does ownership fall on this spectrum in reality? Is it here? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it more over there, right? And what do I actually own in this case? So a layperson would say, I have title, I own a house. But you need to think of it more as a lawyer would, right? And you can think of it more as a regulated cash flow claim, secured by title with strong counterparty possession rights, okay? Think of that again, right? You can think of it as a heavily regulated cash flow, right? A heavily regulated cash flow claim, right? Secured by the title, okay? And with strong counterparty possession rights, okay? That's one other way to look at it. So this is why you'll see serious business people obsess about legal environment. It's not because they're nerds. It's because they've seen what happens when enforcement fails, okay? Jurisdiction matters. There are a lot of people in war zones, for example, who thought they had assets. And then a dictator comes in and then the claims change, right? The building, the thing, is still on the corner block, but the dictator now has the highest claim. Okay, so you can really think about property as violence. Property is a series of competing claims on a given thing, okay? It's the superior violence, usually a government, right, that always has the highest claim in practice, okay? If you don't believe me, you should talk to someone who escaped communist Cuba or lived through the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, okay? All right, so that's philosophical there. That's enough philosophy, but I think you're getting the point, right? Okay, you're starting to think differently about property and what it actually is. So the difference here legally is between possession and property. Okay, so property is the claim, right? And guess what? You physically cannot hold a building. So this is what I see business people get wrong all the time. Okay, if you physically hold something, you have possession, right? But possession is not always ownership, and ownership is not always possession. Entrepreneurs, business people will confuse this constantly. You can think of a basic example in your own business, right? Your financial controller might possess the company's money. They might have possession of it, right? Because they control the bank's login details. But if your financial controller doesn't own it personally, and if he treats it like his, he's in trouble. That's the difference between possession and ownership, okay? It ties back directly to the lecture on limited liability. Your protection depends on behaving consistently with the structure, okay? So property feels abstract now, and that's what I wanted to get at. I wanted to make it more abstract in your mind, right? But it will feel abstract until someone tries to take it from you, right? Until someone tries to enforce their own rights, and that's when it becomes real. So under that external stress, the question at law becomes, who can force whom to do what? That's the enforcement question, and enforcement is jurisdiction, okay? So, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, you need to think about your assets the way that the law thinks about assets. When you say, I own X, right? Translate it into, what rights do I actually have? Who enforces them? Where is the enforcement located? What events can change those rights quickly? Who else has priority over the thing, right? That last one is huge. Priority is where people get blindsided very often, because in many assets, your claim, your title, right, is not the first in line. Creditors can be ahead of you. The bank with their bundle of enforceable rights, okay, they can be ahead of you. Tax authorities can be ahead. Secured lenders, insolvency administrators, okay? So a simple example, debt holders are ahead of equity holders in most jurisdictions. Debt is a higher claim than equity on a given asset. The bank, right, with their mortgage, in a lot of instances, will have a higher claim than you as the title holder, okay? So yes, your name is on the title deed. Big deal, right? In a lot of transactions, a lender, right, is going to have a higher claim to the company's assets or to an asset, right, than the title holder. So your asset, right, is only as strong as your position in that queue of claims. All right, so that's usually the point when you'll see business people and founders and they realize, okay, we weren't managing property, we weren't managing assets, we were mismanaging assumptions about claims, okay? So the key takeaway here is not property is complicated. It's not. The takeaway is you need to stop speaking about assets like they're objects, right? An asset is not a thing. An asset is a bundle of claims, okay? They're enforced somewhere through legal events. When you get serious money, when your business really is starting to grow, you're either going to learn this consciously or you will learn it under stress. And learning it under stress is expensive.